Infidelity, particularly when it becomes a recurring pattern, shakes the very core of trust and self-worth in a relationship. The pain is not just in the act itself, but in the echo of betrayal that lingers long after apologies are made and promises are given. When a woman cheats repeatedly, despite assurances and boundaries, it leaves her partner trapped in a cycle of hope and heartbreak, searching for answers that often seem just out of reach. To understand this complex situation, it's essential to explore the psychology behind repeated infidelity and, perhaps more importantly, to consider how a man can cope and heal. Repeated cheating rarely happens in a vacuum. It is often rooted in deeper psychological patterns and unresolved emotional issues. One explanation lies in attachment theory. Some women remain emotionally tethered to past relationships, unable to sever the emotional connection with an ex or the validation those relationships once provided. Even if the current partnership is loving and supportive, the pull of unfinished business or the comfort of the familiar can override logic and commitment. In these cases, infidelity is less about seeking new love and more about seeking closure or reassurance, even if that closure never truly comes. Another driving force can be a compulsive need for validation. For some, the affirmation of being desired by others becomes a kind of addiction. It's not necessarily about the other person, but rather about the thrill and self-esteem boost that comes from being pursued or wanted. Each new liaison offers a fleeting sense of importance, a temporary high that fades quickly, only to be chased again. Apologies and guilt may follow, but the underlying hunger for validation remains unaddressed, fueling the cycle. Power dynamics also play a significant role. Sometimes, repeated cheating is a way to test boundaries, to see how much can be forgiven, and to measure the depth of a partner's devotion. This is not always a conscious strategy, but rather an unconscious attempt to exert control or to reassure oneself of the relationship's security, even as that very security is being undermined. Emotional immaturity is another common thread. True commitment requires the ability to regulate impulses, delay gratification, and consistently honor promises. When emotional maturity is lacking, remorse may follow infidelity, but it is short-lived. The same patterns re-emerge because the fundamental capacity to change is absent. For the man on the receiving end, setting boundaries can feel like an act of hope. Boundaries are meant to protect and to communicate what is and isn't acceptable. Yet in these situations, boundaries often fail, not because they are unclear, but because they are not respected. Agreeing to boundaries is easy, living by them is much harder, especially when the motivation to change is external rather than internal. If the underlying issues remain unaddressed, boundaries become little more than empty promises, easily swept aside by old habits. The emotional toll of repeated betrayal is profound. It erodes self-esteem, breeds suspicion, and replaces peace with anxiety. Many men find themselves questioning their worth, replaying conversations, and scrutinizing every interaction for signs of deceit. The trust that once formed the foundation of the relationship becomes fragile, and the constant cycle of forgiveness and disappointment leaves emotional scars that can be hard to heal. So, what should a man do in the face of repeated infidelity? It is a deeply personal decision, but certain truths remain. You cannot force change in someone else. Compassion is important, but loving someone does not mean sacrificing your own well-being or becoming their therapist. A relationship should be a partnership of equals, not a rehabilitation program for one partner's unresolved issues. If genuine change is not forthcoming, if apologies are followed by repeated betrayals, it may be time to walk away. This is not an act of failure, but an act of self-respect. Healing begins with releasing the burden of responsibility for another's choices, and focusing on rebuilding your own sense of self-worth and peace. Ultimately, love should be a safe and nurturing space. If repeated infidelity has made it a battlefield, choosing to let go is sometimes the bravest and healthiest decision you can make. In doing so, you reclaim your dignity, your peace, and the possibility of healthier, more fulfilling love in the future.